You think I won't teach you respect tonight, Emma? I swear I will." The shout thundered through the small living room of apartment 7C at Riverside Towers in Chicago's South Side, bouncing off the walls like thunder on a winter night. Plates clattered in the kitchen sink. A baby's cry erupted from the bedroom down the hall. Derek's voice rose again, deeper, harsher, trembling with barely controlled rage. That was how the neighbors knew it had begun again. The storm inside apartment 7C had returned. Emma's voice shook as she backed toward the wall. "Derek, please, not tonight. The baby just fell asleep." She was barefoot, still wearing her house dress, her face glistening with sweat and fear. Her voice was small, but her eyes showed the exhaustion of a woman who'd begged one too many times. "You think I care about that baby right now?" Derek barked, stepping forward. The stench of whiskey filled the air between them. His fifth glass sat half empty on the coffee table beside a plate of cold Chinese takeout. The TV in the corner hummed with a basketball game that nobody was watching. The night was thick, heavy with tension that had been building for weeks. "I only asked why you came home late," she whispered, her hands clutching her cardigan tightly. "That's all I said." "You asked me like I'm some kid you're checking up on," he shouted, slamming his palm against the drywall. "You think because you got that job at the hospital you're better than me now?" His voice was thunder. The baby's cry from the bedroom grew louder, more desperate. Emma took a step back toward the hallway. "I didn't mean any disrespect, Derek. Please, you've been drinking. Don't you dare!" His hand moved faster than her eyes could track. The slap landed hard across her cheek. The sound echoed, sharp and brutal, followed by her gasp of pain. Her head snapped sideways from the force. A thin line of blood formed at the corner of her lip. The neighbor upstairs, Mrs. Peterson, paused her vacuum cleaner. Someone in 7B muted their television. The silence that followed was heavy and terrifying. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the armchair to steady herself. "You're drunk," she whispered. "Please, just go to bed." Derek's eyes widened with fresh rage. "Drunk? So now I'm a drunk? You want to insult me again?" He grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh. She screamed, "Derek, you're hurting me." "You deserve it." He shoved her backward. She fell against the edge of the coffee table, knocking down the glass that shattered on the hardwood floor. The baby's cry turned into a wail that pierced the walls. Emma tried to crawl toward the bedroom, toward her child, but Derek kicked the table aside and yanked her back by her hair. "I'm the man of this house," he shouted, veins bulging in his neck. "You will respect me, or I'll—" "Derek, stop!" Her tears fell freely now, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. "Please, I've done nothing wrong. You're scaring me." But he wasn't listening anymore. Rage had transformed him into something monstrous, someone she didn't recognize. From outside the door, Mrs. Peterson's voice rang out. "Derek, stop this madness before you kill that girl!" But the door was locked. The deadbolt sealed them inside with his fury. He paced like a caged animal, his eyes darting between her crumpled form and the broken wedding photo lying among the glass shards. The smiling couple in that frame seemed like strangers from another lifetime. "You embarrassed me in front of my brother last week," he growled. "I heard what you said." "I didn't say anything." He kicked the ottoman beside her. The sound made her flinch violently. She tried to crawl again, but he caught her by the wrist, pulling her up. "Let me go!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Say you'll never disrespect me again." "Derek, please!" Another slap. This one harder, vicious. Her earring flew off, clattering across the floor. Her cheek swelled immediately, turning an angry red. "You'll learn," he spat. Downstairs in the lobby, two neighbors debated in hushed tones. "Should we call 911?" one asked nervously. "You know how it is with married couples," another replied with a shake of her head. "They don't like strangers getting involved in their business." "But he's going to kill her one day," a third muttered. No one moved. In Chicago, domestic disputes were too common. Everyone hoped it would end before tragedy struck. Back inside apartment 7C, Emma was trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes darted toward the balcony door, calculating escape through the blur of tears. "I'll leave," she said softly, desperately. "I'll go to my sister's tonight. Just let me get the baby." "You're not going anywhere," he thundered. His hand shot out again. This time she blocked it, an instinctive act of self-preservation. The defiance enraged him further. He grabbed her by the throat and shoved her toward the sliding glass door that led to the small balcony. "You think you can fight me?" She choked, gasping for air, her fingers clawing uselessly at his wrists. The baby's cries echoed like distant church bells, growing fainter as darkness edged her vision. Her knees weakened. "Derek," she wheezed. "Please, stop." He froze for half a second, his grip loosening slightly. But when she pushed his hand away to breathe, his anger flared white-hot again. That was the moment it happened. A shove, a scream, a body tumbling backward through the open door. Emma's scream tore through the Chicago night as she fell over the balcony railing. The sound of her body hitting the concrete 3 floors below silenced the entire building. "Oh my God!" someone shrieked from another apartment. "She fell!" another voice shouted. "Somebody call 911!" Derek stood frozen at the balcony edge, staring down in disbelief. His heartbeat pounded in his ears like war drums. The air left his lungs. His hands began shaking violently. "Emma," he whispered, barely audible over the rushing blood in his head. "Emma, get up." But she didn't move. He staggered backward, knocking over a chair. His breathing turned rapid and shallow. "What did I do? Oh God, what did I do?" He stumbled out of the apartment, racing down the emergency stairs. When he reached the ground-level courtyard, a small crowd had already gathered. Emma lay sprawled on the concrete, blood pooling beneath her head, her limbs at unnatural angles. "She's not dead!" someone yelled. "She's breathing!" Mrs. Peterson knelt beside her, pressing her scarf against the head wound. "Someone get an ambulance, now!" Derek fell to his knees beside his wife, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. "Emma, please, I didn't mean... It was an accident." Her eyes fluttered weakly, unfocused, before closing again. "You monster!" Mrs. Peterson snapped, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to prison for this." The sound of sirens filled the courtyard within minutes. Red and blue lights painted the building walls as police cars, and an ambulance screeched to a halt. 2 officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. "Who did this?" one demanded. The neighbors pointed at Derek in unison. "He's the husband," they said. "He beat her and threw her off." The officer didn't hesitate. He grabbed Derek by the collar and slammed him against the brick wall. "So you're the piece of garbage who did this to your own wife?" "It was an accident," Derek stammered, his voice cracking. "She fell, I swear." "Tell that to the judge," the officer barked, snapping handcuffs onto Derek's wrists with unnecessary force. Paramedics rushed to Emma with a stretcher and medical bags. One checked her pulse, while another fitted an oxygen mask over her face. "She's alive," one medic called out, "but barely. Possible internal bleeding, head trauma. We need to move fast." The crowd murmured prayers. Some cursed under their breath. Mrs. Peterson held Emma's baby, who had finally stopped crying from exhaustion. "Dear God," she whispered, rocking the infant gently. "Please don't let this child lose his mother tonight." Derek sat in the back of the police cruiser, his head bowed, handcuffs biting into his wrists. He could still smell her perfume on his shirt mixed with the metallic scent of blood. "I didn't mean it," he whispered to no one. "I just wanted her to listen." The officer in the driver's seat glanced back with cold eyes. "You wanted her to listen? So you beat her half to death and threw her off a balcony? You men never learn." Derek's tears fell silently onto his lap as the cruiser pulled away from Riverside Towers. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, nurses and doctors swarmed Emma the moment the ambulance doors flew open. "Female, late 20s, fell 3 stories, the paramedic reported quickly. "Multiple fractures, severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding." "Get her to Trauma Bay 2, now," a doctor shouted. They wheeled her through automatic doors at a run. Tubes were inserted. Machines beeped frantically. The smell of antiseptic and urgency filled the sterile air. "We're losing her," a nurse cried as the monitor flatlined. "No, start compressions," the doctor ordered, pressing his hands firmly on her chest. "Come on, Emma, stay with us." For 30 agonizing seconds, there was only the sound of compressions and desperate commands. Then, a beep. Faint, fragile, but there. "She's back," someone whispered with relief. "We've got a pulse." "Barely," the doctor said grimly. "Prep her for surgery. Every second counts." Back at the 12th District Police Station, Derek sat alone on a cold metal bench in a holding cell. The concrete walls seemed to close in around him as the reality of what he'd done crashed over him in waves. He buried his face in his cuffed hands and wept until the sun began to rise over Chicago. Morning light filtered through the barred window of Derek's cell, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's body falling, heard the sickening impact, felt the phantom weight of his own hands around her throat. The metal door clanged open. A uniformed officer stood in the doorway, his expression hard. "You've got a visitor." Derek looked up, expecting his lawyer. Instead, his younger brother Marcus stood in the corridor, his face etched with exhaustion and disappointment. "5 minutes," the officer said, closing the door behind him. Marcus sat down on the opposite bench, studying his brother with a mixture of grief and anger. "They're saying attempted murder, Derek. Do you understand what that means?" Derek's voice was hoarse. Is she alive?" "Barely." Marcus's jaw clenched. "She's in a coma. 3 broken ribs, fractured skull, internal bleeding. The doctors say it's a miracle she survived the fall." Derek's shoulders shook. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," Marcus cut him off. "Don't you dare say you didn't mean it. I've been telling you for years to get help, to stop drinking, to go to therapy, but you wouldn't listen." Silence filled the small space. "They have witnesses," Marcus continued quietly. "Mrs. Peterson, the Johnsons from 7B, even the security camera footage from the lobby. Everyone heard her screaming. Everyone saw you drunk." Derek leaned his head back against the cold wall. "What happens now?" "You'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. The prosecutor is pushing for maximum charges." Marcus stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Emma's sister Sarah is with her at the hospital. She's taking care of the baby. At least your son will have family." "Marcus, I love you, Derek. You're my brother. But what you did—" He shook his head. "I don't know if I can forgive this." The door closed with a metallic clang, leaving Derek alone again with his demons. Across town at Northwestern Memorial, Emma lay motionless in the ICU. Machines breathed for her, monitored her failing systems, kept her tethered to life by the thinnest of threads. Sarah sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside the bed, holding her sister's limp hand. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the sterile silence. "You have to wake up," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Your baby needs you. I need you." The door opened softly, and a nurse entered to check Emma's vitals. "Any change?" Sarah asked hopefully. The nurse gave a sympathetic smile. "Her brain activity is showing some improvement. That's a very good sign, but she's not out of the woods yet." After the nurse left, Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos. Emma's wedding day, her graduation from nursing school, the day she brought the baby home from the hospital. Each image showed a smiling woman full of life and hope. "How did it come to this?" Sarah whispered. 2 days later, Derek was led into the Cook County Courthouse in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious onlookers, and several neighbors from Riverside Towers who had come to watch justice unfold. His public defender, a tired-looking man named Robert Chen, sat beside him at the defendant's table. "Mr. Foster," Judge Margaret Harrison said, peering over her reading glasses, "you are charged with attempted murder and aggravated domestic battery. How do you plead?" The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned to Derek. Mr. Chen leaned close. "You can plead not guilty and fight this. The evidence is circumstantial." Derek shook his head slowly. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Guilty, Your Honor." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "Mr. Foster," the judge said carefully, "do you understand what you're saying? You're admitting to attempting to murder your wife?" Derek's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, ma'am, I pushed her. I hurt her. She begged me to stop and I didn't listen. I'm guilty." The prosecutor, a stern woman named Linda Martinez, stood. "Your Honor, we request that Mrs. Emma Foster be allowed to give a victim impact statement as soon as she's medically able." "Granted," Judge Harrison said. "This hearing is continued for 2 weeks. Mr. Foster, you'll remain in custody pending sentencing." The gavel struck, and Derek was led away. As he passed the gallery, he saw Sarah in the back row, her eyes burning with fury. "She's awake!" Sarah called out suddenly. "Emma woke up this morning." Derek stopped walking. His heart hammered in his chest. She's awake?" "And the first thing she did was ask about her baby," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Not you. Never you again." Guards pulled Derek forward, but for the first time in days, a spark of something flickered in his chest. Not hope. He had no right to hope, but relief that she was alive. At the hospital, Emma had indeed regained consciousness. Her head was wrapped in white bandages, her face swollen and bruised, but her eyes were open and focused. Dr. Patel stood by her bedside, checking her chart. "You're very lucky, Mrs. Foster. The fall should have killed you." Emma's voice was raspy from the breathing tube. "My son? He's safe with your sister. Would you like to see him?" Tears slipped down Emma's cheeks. "Yes, please." Minutes later, Sarah entered carrying the baby. Emma's arms were too weak to hold him, but Sarah placed him gently on the bed beside her. The infant cooed and reached for his mother's face with tiny fingers. "Mama's here," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here, baby." Sarah wiped her own eyes. "The police want a statement from you. They need to know what happened." Emma closed her eyes, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. "He was drunk. I asked where he'd been. He got angry." She paused, swallowing hard. "He hit me, multiple times. Then he pushed me off the balcony." "Will you testify?" Emma opened her eyes and looked at her son. "Yes. Not for me, for him. So he grows up knowing his mother was strong enough to say no more." The next day, 2 detectives came to take her formal statement. Emma recounted everything, her voice steady despite the trauma. When they finished, Detective Williams looked at her with respect. "You're very brave, ma'am. Most women don't press charges." "Most women don't survive," Emma replied quietly. 2 weeks later, Emma was wheeled into the courthouse. She still had bandages on her head and her right arm in a sling, but she insisted on coming. The courtroom fell silent when she entered. Derek, seated at the defendant's table, couldn't bring himself to look at her at first. When he finally did, the sight nearly broke him. She looked fragile, but fierce, a survivor carrying the visible scars of his violence. Judge Harrison addressed Emma gently. "Mrs. Foster, you may give your statement." A bailiff wheeled Emma to the front. She took a deep breath and looked directly at Derek. "My name is Emma Foster," she began, her voice stronger than anyone expected. "And I'm alive by the grace of God." The courtroom was absolutely still. "The man sitting there is my husband. He promised to love and protect me." Her voice wavered slightly. "Instead, he beat me until I begged for mercy. And when I tried to run, he pushed me off our balcony." Derek's tears fell silently. "I remember falling. I remember thinking my son would grow up without a mother." Emma paused, composing herself. "But I survived. Not for him, for my child, and for every woman who thinks she has to stay because she has nowhere else to go." She turned to Judge Harrison. "I'm pressing full charges, because if I don't, he might do this to someone else." The judge nodded solemnly. "Thank you for your courage, Mrs. Foster." After Emma was wheeled out, Judge Harrison addressed Derek directly. Mr. Derek Foster, you've pleaded guilty to attempted murder and aggravated domestic battery. This court sentences you to 15 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. The gavel struck. Derek closed his eyes. Thank you, Your Honor. As he was led away, he looked back one final time. Emma sat in the gallery with Sarah beside her, holding her hand. Their eyes met across the courtroom, his filled with remorse, hers with resolution. Then he was gone, disappearing through the heavy doors into the rest of his life. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Emma's wheelchair. Mrs. Foster, what message do you have for women in abusive relationships? Emma looked directly into the cameras. Leave before you become a headline. Love should never send you to the hospital. The clip went viral within hours, viewed millions of times across social media. Her face, bruised but unbroken, became a symbol of survival. 6 months passed like water through clenched fists, slowly, painfully, but inevitably forward. Emma's physical wounds healed. The bandages came off. The bruises faded to yellow, then disappeared completely. But the nightmares remained. Every night she woke gasping, feeling phantom hands around her throat, hearing the whistle of wind as she fell. Her therapist, Dr. Reynolds, a kind woman with silver-streaked hair, sat across from her in the small office on Michigan Avenue. Have you thought about the letter? Emma stared at her hands. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, a single envelope with the Cook County Correctional Facility return address. She hadn't opened it. I don't know if I want to read what he has to say. You don't have to, Dr. Reynolds said gently, but sometimes closure requires confronting what we fear. That night, Emma sat at her kitchen table in her new apartment, a small one-bedroom in Lincoln Park that Sarah had helped her find, far from Riverside Towers, far from balconies. The baby slept peacefully in his crib in the bedroom. The letter sat unopened on the table like a grenade with an invisible pin. She finally picked it up, hands trembling slightly, and tore it open. Emma, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing because my counselor here says I need to take accountability beyond my guilty plea. Every day I think about that night. I hear your voice begging me to stop. I see your face when I did what I did. The guards have to wake me because I scream in my sleep. I started going to AA meetings here. I'm 6 months sober. I'm taking anger management classes. I'm reading books I should have read years ago about what it means to be a man. A real one, not the monster I was. I know this doesn't fix anything. I know I can't undo the pain. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to understand what I destroyed. If our son ever asks about me, tell him I was a man who let his demons win. Tell him to be nothing like me. Derek. Emma read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer with other documents from the case. She didn't cry. She didn't feel anger. She felt something she hadn't expected, a strange, distant hope that he might actually change, even if that change would never benefit her. Good, she whispered to the empty room. Be better. Just be better somewhere far from us. Meanwhile, inside Cook County Correctional, Derek's transformation was slow but genuine. The man who'd arrived 6 months ago, broken, defensive, drowning in guilt, was being dismantled piece by piece. His cellmate, Marcus Washington, a 45-year-old man serving time for drug trafficking, had become an unlikely mentor. You read that book I gave you? Marcus asked one evening as they sat in their cell. Derek held up The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah, it's helping me understand why I was the way I was. Understanding ain't the same as excusing, Marcus said firmly. You know that, right? I know. Derek closed the book. My father used to beat my mother. I swore I'd never be like him. But you were. The words hit like a punch. Derek nodded slowly. I was worse, because I knew how it felt to watch it happen, and I did it anyway. Marcus studied him for a long moment. The question ain't whether you're a monster, man. Everybody's got monster in them. The question is, what are you gonna do now that you've seen your own? That night, Derek started writing in the journal his prison counselor had recommended. Page after page of brutal honesty, memories of his childhood, his father's violence, his mother's tears, the first time he raised his voice at Emma, the first time he raised his hand. I thought power meant control, he wrote. But real power is choosing not to hurt the people you claim to love. The prison offered a victims' impact program where inmates learned about the lasting effects of their crimes. Derek volunteered immediately. In one session, a woman survivor of domestic violence spoke to the group. Her words cut through the room like a blade. "You think you're the victim because you're in prison?" she said, her voice steady and fierce. "I'm in a prison too. A prison of fear and trauma and nightmares. The difference is, you chose your cell." "I didn't choose mine." Derek left that session shaking. That night, he wrote another letter to Emma, one he would never send. "I understand now why you press charges, not as revenge, as protection. For yourself and for everyone I might have hurt next. Thank you for being stronger than I ever was." Months turned into a year. Emma's life slowly rebuilt itself like bone knitting back together after a break, stronger at the fracture line. Her catering business, Emma's Kitchen, had taken off. She hired 2 employees and was catering corporate events downtown. Money was still tight, but she was surviving. More than surviving. Thriving. She started volunteering at a women's shelter in Englewood, sharing her story with women who were still trapped in the cycle she'd escaped. One evening, a young woman named Jennifer approached her after a support group meeting. She had a black eye poorly covered with makeup. "How did you find the courage to leave?" Jennifer asked quietly. Emma thought carefully before answering. "I didn't find courage. I found a breaking point, and I decided my son deserved to see what a strong mother looks like, even if it meant being a struggling single mother." "But don't you still love him?" Emma paused. "Love doesn't disappear just because someone hurts you. It transforms. Mine turned into boundaries, self-respect, survival, and that's a better kind of love. The kind you give yourself." Jennifer wiped her eyes. "Thank you." 2 years into Derek's sentence, something unexpected happened. A fire broke out in the prison kitchen. Faulty wiring, investigators later determined. Smoke filled the cell blocks. Alarms screamed. Guards shouted orders. In the chaos, Derek saw a young inmate, barely 20, frozen in fear as flames licked toward his cell. Without thinking, Derek ran through the smoke, grabbed the kid, and dragged him toward the exit. "Come on!" Derek shouted, his eyes streaming from the smoke. "Move!" He pulled 3 more men to safety before the firefighters arrived. By the time the blaze was contained, Derek was on the ground coughing violently, his prison uniform singed. The incident made the Chicago Tribune, "Inmate Saves Lives in Prison Fire." Emma saw the headline while grocery shopping. She stood in the produce section, staring at Derek's photo. Older, thinner, but something in his eyes looked different, clearer. Sarah called her that evening. "Did you see the news?" "Yeah." "Are you okay?" Emma considered the question. "Yeah, I am. He saved people, Sarah. Maybe that's his way of making something right." "It doesn't undo what he did to you." "No," Emma agreed. "But maybe it means he's becoming the person I used to believe he could be." That night, Emma did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She wrote him back. "Derek, I read about what you did. I'm glad you saved those men. I'm glad you're finding ways to be brave in the right direction. I'm writing to tell you that I've forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger was keeping me trapped. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It means I'm finally free. I hope you continue to grow. I hope you find peace, but find it away from us. Our son is doing well. He's happy and healthy. That's all you need to know. Take care of yourself. Emma." When Derek received the letter 3 days later, he read it in his cell with tears streaming down his face. Marcus watched from the top bunk. "Good news?" Derek wiped his eyes. "The best news. She's free. She's finally free of me." "That's real love, brother," Marcus said quietly, letting her go. Derek folded the letter carefully and placed it under his pillow. For the first time since that terrible night, he felt like perhaps redemption wasn't just a word, it was a distant possibility. 4 years into his sentence, Derek Foster was no longer the man who entered Cook County Correctional Facility. The physical transformation was obvious. He'd lost 30 pounds, gained muscle from the prison yard, let his hair grow longer. But the real change was internal. Invisible to everyone except those who knew him well, he'd become a leader in the prison's faith and restoration program. Every Tuesday evening, he led a group for men convicted of domestic violence. 20 men in a circle, folding chairs on cold concrete, talking about things most men would rather keep buried. "My name is Derek," he said, opening one Tuesday session, "and I nearly killed my wife 4 years ago." The words never got easier to say. Good. They shouldn't. "I used to think being a man meant being in control, having the last word, making sure my wife knew who was boss." He paused, looking at the faces around him, some defiant, some broken, some genuinely seeking change. "I was wrong about everything." A newer inmate, Tommy, raised his hand. "But if she hadn't pushed your buttons—" "Stop," Derek interrupted firmly. "That's the lie we tell ourselves. Nobody makes you hit them. Nobody makes you wrap your hands around their throat. You choose that, and if you keep telling yourself otherwise, you'll do it again when you get out." The room fell silent. By his 5th year, Derek had earned enough trust to be transferred to a minimum security facility downstate, a transitional program that prepared inmates for re-entry into society. The place looked less like a prison and more like a rundown college campus, with actual doors instead of bars. Here he worked in the kitchen, took community college classes online, and volunteered with a program that brought therapy dogs to inmates with PTSD. One afternoon, his counselor, Mr. Peterson, called him into his office. "Derek, you've got a visitor request." Derek frowned. He rarely got visitors anymore. Marcus, his brother, came every few months, but that was it. "Who?" "Your son's school counselor, a Mrs. Patricia King. She says it's important." Derek's heart hammered. "Is he okay? Is something wrong?" "She didn't say. She wants to discuss something with you in person." The visit was scheduled for the following Saturday. Derek barely slept that week. When Mrs. King arrived, she was a petite African-American woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. They sat in the visiting room, a cafeteria-style space with plastic tables and vending machines. "Mr. Foster, I'll get straight to the point," she said, opening a folder. "Your son Lucas is 7 years old now. Bright kid, sweet disposition. But he's struggling." Derek's chest tightened. "Struggling how?" "He knows his father is in prison. He knows vaguely that you hurt his mother, but he has questions we can't answer. He's withdrawn in class, getting into fights with other kids who tease him about having a criminal dad." Derek's eyes burned. "What do you need from me?" His mother, Emma, is doing wonderfully. She's stable, strong, building a good life. But Lucas is at the age where he needs to understand his story. She leaned forward. "Emma sent me here to ask you a question. Would you be willing to write him letters? Age-appropriate ones, explaining who you are and what you did, taking responsibility, not asking for forgiveness. Just the truth." Derek was silent for a long moment. "She's giving me a chance to be a father, even from here? She's giving her son a chance to understand his history. Don't confuse the two." Derek nodded slowly. "I'll do it. Tell her. Tell her thank you." That night, Derek began the hardest letter he'd ever written. "Dear Lucas, my name is Derek Foster, and I'm your father. You probably have lots of questions about me. I want to answer them honestly, even though the truth is hard. I'm in prison because I hurt your mother very badly. I hit her and pushed her, and she almost died. It was the worst thing I've ever done, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better than the man who did that. You might wonder why I did it. The truth is, I was angry, and I drank too much, and I never learned how to control my feelings. But none of that is an excuse. Adults are supposed to protect children and take care of the people they love. I failed at both. I'm writing to you not because I expect you to forgive me or love me. I'm writing because you deserve to know the truth, and because I want you to know that you are nothing like me. You are kind, you are smart, you are loved by your mother, who is the strongest, bravest person I've ever known. Be like her. Never be like me. With hope that you'll be better. Mrs. King delivered the letter to Emma first. She read it twice, wiping tears from her eyes, before handing it to Mrs. King. "You can give this to him," Emma said quietly, "but I want to be there when he reads it." Lucas read the letter sitting at the kitchen table, his small fingers tracing the words he didn't quite understand yet. Emma sat beside him, ready to answer questions. "Mommy, why was Daddy so angry?" Emma chose her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems inside their hearts that they don't know how to fix, and instead of asking for help, they hurt the people around them." "Will he hurt us again?" "No, baby. He's far away, and you're safe. I promise." Lucas looked at the letter again. "Can I write him back?" Emma's breath caught. "Do you want to?" He nodded. "I want to tell him I'm good at soccer." That night, Lucas carefully wrote in big, uneven letters, "Dear Dad, I'm good at soccer. I'm in 2nd grade. I have a dog now named Buster. I don't understand why you hurt Mommy, but Mrs. King says you're trying to be better. Okay." Lucas. When Derek received that letter 3 weeks later, he sat on his bunk and cried like he hadn't cried in years. Not tears of self-pity, but of gratitude, that Emma was generous enough to let him have even this small connection to his son. He wrote back immediately, telling Lucas about his favorite books, asking about school, never mentioning the past unless Lucas brought it up. Their correspondence continued monthly, simple, honest, careful. In his 7th year, Derek was approved for early parole. He'd completed every program, volunteered hundreds of hours, had perfect behavior marks. The parole board hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. Emma received a call from the parole board. "Mrs. Foster, Mr. Foster is up for early release. You have the right to make a statement in opposition or support." Emma sat in her living room, phone pressed to her ear, Lucas playing with Buster in the next room. "What happens if I oppose it?" "He'll likely serve his full sentence, another 8 years." Emma closed her eyes. "And if I don't oppose?" "He could be released within 60 days. After hanging up, Emma called Sarah. "Are you seriously considering not fighting this?" Sarah asked incredulously. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "He's not the same person he was. The letters he writes to Lucas, they're genuine. He's taking responsibility. That doesn't mean he deserves to be free." "No," Emma agreed, "but maybe it means he deserves a chance to prove he's changed." The day of the hearing, Emma surprised everyone by showing up. She sat in the gallery wearing a blue dress, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. When it came time for victim statements, she stood. "My name is Emma Foster. 7 years ago, the man in front of you tried to kill me. He broke my ribs, fractured my skull, and threw me off a balcony." Derek kept his eyes on the table, unable to look at her. "I spent months recovering, years in therapy. I still have nightmares." She paused. "But I also believe in redemption. I've read the reports. I've seen the change in his letters to our son. I'm not saying I trust him. I'm saying I don't want to be the reason someone who might actually be reformed stays locked away." She looked directly at Derek for the first time. "I don't oppose his release, but I want a restraining order, 500 feet minimum, and mandatory continued counseling." Derek finally looked up, his eyes red. He mouthed, "Thank you." The parole board deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the chairman spoke. "Mr. Foster, you are granted parole effective 60 days from today, with the conditions stated by Mrs. Foster. Do not make us regret this decision." Derek nodded, unable to speak. 2 months later, he walked out of the correctional facility into the spring sunshine, wearing donated clothes and carrying a plastic bag of belongings. Marcus was there to pick him up. "Welcome back to the world, brother," Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder. Derek looked around at the traffic, the trees, the ordinary miracle of freedom. "I don't deserve this." "Probably not," Marcus agreed. "So spend the rest of your life earning it." Derek nodded. "That's the plan." The first 6 months of freedom were harder than Derek expected. The world had moved on without him. Smartphones were different, streaming services had replaced cable, and Chicago felt both familiar and foreign. Marcus had helped him find a small studio apartment in Pilsen, far from Emma's neighborhood. He worked as a line cook at a diner on 18th Street, took the Blue Line to mandatory counseling sessions twice a week, and attended AA meetings every night. Some nights, the freedom felt overwhelming. He'd wake at 3 a.m., expecting to hear the clang of cell doors and the shouting of inmates, only to find silence. Those were the hardest nights, when he had to choose again and again not to drink, not to fall back. He wrote Lucas every week, but never asked to see him. That boundary was Emma's to set, not his. One Saturday morning, 9 months into his parole, Derek was walking to work when he passed a community center with a sign. "Men's Domestic Violence Prevention Workshop. Volunteers needed." He stopped walking, stared at the sign. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he went inside. The director, a weary-looking social worker named Janet Rivera, listened to his story with folded arms. "You understand we work with victims, right?" she said carefully. "Many of them have trauma from men just like you were." "I understand," Derek said. "I'm not asking to work directly with them, but if there's anything, cleaning, setup, whatever, I want to help. I need to do something meaningful with this second chance." Janet studied him for a long moment. "We need someone to set up chairs, make coffee, handle logistics for our Wednesday night men's groups. Unpaid. You'd report to me, and if I hear one complaint, you're gone." "Yes, ma'am." "Why are you really doing this, Derek?" He met her eyes. "Because 7 years ago I almost killed the woman I loved. And if I'm not actively working to prevent that from happening to someone else, then I'm wasting the air I breathe." He started that Wednesday. The work was simple: arranging chairs, brewing coffee, taking attendance. But hearing the men share their stories in the groups he facilitated reminded him constantly of who he'd been and who he was fighting not to become again. One evening, after a particularly difficult session where a man broke down admitting he'd hit his girlfriend, Derek stayed late cleaning up. Janet found him stacking chairs in the empty room. "You okay?" she asked. Derek set down a chair. "I heard myself in that guy. The justifications, the rage, the shame." He looked at her. "Does it ever stop? The guilt?" Janet sat on one of the chairs. "I've worked with a lot of men like you, Derek. The ones who feel no guilt worry me. The ones who drown in it worry me differently. You have to find the middle. Enough guilt to never forget, but not so much you can't function." "How do I do that?" "By showing up, day after day, proving through actions, not words, that you've changed." She stood. "You're doing that. Keep going." Meanwhile, across the city, Emma's life had blossomed in ways she never imagined. Her catering business had expanded to 3 employees and regular corporate contracts. Lucas was thriving in 4th grade, playing soccer, bringing home A's. She'd started dating again, carefully, slowly. A teacher named Michael, who was patient with her boundaries, who understood when she had bad nights, who never once raised his voice in anger. But she still thought about Derek, not with longing or regret, but with a strange curiosity about how his story was unfolding. She'd hear updates from mutual acquaintances. He was sober, working steady, volunteering somewhere. Good, she'd think. Be well. Just be well away from us. 2 years after Derek's release on a cold February afternoon, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Emma was catering a corporate event downtown when she got a frantic call from Lucas's school. There'd been an accident. A school bus had slid on ice and crashed on Lakeshore Drive. Her heart stopped. "Is he okay?" "He's shaken up but unharmed. They've taken all the kids to Northwestern Memorial to be checked. You should come." Emma abandoned the event, grabbed her keys, and raced to the hospital, the same hospital where she'd fought for her life 8 years earlier. By the time she arrived, most of the kids were being treated for minor injuries. Lucas sat in the emergency room with a small cut on his forehead, being entertained by a nurse. "Mommy!" He jumped up when he saw her. She hugged him fiercely. "You're okay. Thank God you're okay." "It was scary," he admitted. "But this guy helped pull us out of the bus before the ambulance came." "What guy?" "I don't know his name. He was just there." Emma's phone buzzed. Sarah calling. "Emma, turn on the news, now." She found a TV in the waiting room. The local news was showing helicopter footage of the accident. The banner read, "Bystander saves students in bus crash." And there, on the screen, was Derek. The camera showed him helping firefighters pull children from the damaged bus, his jacket thrown over one shivering student, directing traffic away from the scene until first responders arrived. Emma's hand covered her mouth. When the news anchor interviewed witnesses, a mother said through tears, "That man saved my daughter. He didn't hesitate, just jumped right in." Later that evening, after Lucas was cleared and they'd driven home, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what she'd seen. Derek had been there, at that exact moment, doing exactly what needed to be done. She pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done in 8 years. She called his number, the one he'd included in his last letter to Lucas, in case of emergency. He answered on the third ring. "Hello? It's Emma." Silence. Then quietly, "Is everything okay? Is Lucas—" "He's fine. He was on that bus today, the one you helped." Another long silence. "I didn't know he was there. I just saw kids trapped and—" "I know. I saw the news." She took a breath. "Derek, I'm calling because I want you to know—" Her voice caught. "Thank you for helping those kids, for helping my son." "Emma, I would have done it for any kid. I didn't do it for—" "I know. That's why I'm thanking you. Because you did it because it was right, not because of us." They talked for 20 minutes. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was two people who'd survived the worst of each other, acknowledging that sometimes broken things grow into something new, even if they never fit back together the same way. Before hanging up, Emma said, "Lucas has been asking if he can meet you, not regularly, just once, to see who his father actually is now." Derek's breath hitched. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think he needs it for himself. Next Saturday, the park on Fullerton, noon, 1 hour." "Thank you, Emma. I'll be there." That Saturday, Derek arrived 30 minutes early, so nervous he nearly turned back 3 times. When he saw Emma arrive with Lucas, now tall for his age, with Emma's eyes and his own stubborn chin, his heart broke and healed simultaneously. Emma stayed close, but gave them space to talk. Derek knelt down to Lucas's height. "Hi, Lucas." "Hi." The boy studied him carefully. "You're taller than I thought." Derek laughed, almost choking on emotion. "You're exactly how I imagined. Your mom tells me you're good at soccer." They talked awkwardly at first, then more easily. Derek asked about school, friends, Buster the dog. Lucas asked careful questions about prison, about being sorry, about change. "Do you still get angry?" Lucas asked. "Sometimes," Derek answered honestly. "But I learned how to stop before I hurt anyone. I go to meetings. I talk to counselors. I do the work to be better every single day." "Good," Lucas said simply. Then, after a pause, "Mom says you saved kids from the bus." "I just did what anyone should do." "That's what heroes do," Lucas said matter-of-factly. Derek's eyes filled with tears. "Your mom is the real hero, buddy. She survived something terrible and built an amazing life. That's strength. When the hour was up, Emma approached. Time to go, Lucas. The boy surprised everyone by hugging Derek briefly. Thanks for the letters and for saving those kids. Derek knelt down one more time. Thank you for giving me a chance to know you, even a little. As they walked away, Emma looked back once. Derek stood alone under the trees watching them go, tears streaming down his face. 3 months later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, Derek was closing up the community center after a men's group session when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Mr. Foster, this is Northwestern Memorial Hospital. You're listed as emergency contact for Marcus Washington? Derek's blood ran cold. Marcus, his brother. What happened? He's been in a car accident. You should come. Derek ran the entire mile to the hospital. By the time he arrived, soaking wet, Marcus was in surgery for internal injuries. The doctors said it would be hours before they knew anything. He sat in the waiting room, head in his hands, praying to a God he'd only recently started believing might actually listen. Emma saw the news on social media. A mutual friend had posted asking for prayers for Marcus Foster. Without overthinking it, she drove to the hospital. She found Derek alone in the waiting room at 2 a.m., looking exactly how she'd looked years ago in this same hospital, terrified and helpless. Derek, he looked up, shocked. Emma, what are you doing here? I heard about Marcus. She sat down beside him, maintaining respectful distance. How is he? Still in surgery. They don't know if... His voice broke. They sat in silence for a while. Then Emma said quietly, When I was here 8 years ago, your brother came to visit me. Did you know that? Derek shook his head. He brought me flowers, told me he was sorry, that he'd failed to help you get help earlier. She paused. He's a good man. He's the only one who never gave up on me. Hours later, a doctor emerged. Mr. Foster, your brother made it through surgery. He's critical but stable. Derek nearly collapsed with relief. Emma caught his arm. Thank God, he whispered. Over the next week, as Marcus slowly recovered, Derek practically lived at the hospital. And several times, Emma stopped by, bringing coffee, sitting quietly, being present in a way that spoke of a grace Derek knew he'd never fully comprehend. One evening, as they sat in the cafeteria, Emma said, You know what I realized? Forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It's a choice you make over and over. Some days are harder than others. Do you regret it? Not opposing my parole? Emma thought carefully. No, because you proved something important. That people can actually change if they do the work. You did the work, Derek. You're still doing it. I'll do it for the rest of my life. Good, because that's what it takes. When Marcus was finally released from the hospital, he looked at his brother with knowing eyes. Emma came to visit a lot. She's a good person. She's the person you should have been for her all along. Derek nodded. I know. That's why I'll spend the rest of my life being that person for everyone else I can help. 2 years later, Derek had become a certified domestic violence counselor. He worked full-time at the community center, leading groups, mentoring young men, speaking at schools about the real consequences of violence. Emma and Michael got married in a small ceremony. Derek sent a card with 2 words, Be happy. She kept it on her refrigerator. Lucas visited Derek once a month now, supervised at first, then gradually on their own, as Derek continued to prove himself trustworthy. They played basketball, talked about life, and slowly built something that wasn't quite a traditional father-son relationship, but was real nonetheless. One Saturday, Lucas asked, Dad, do you think you've made up for what you did? Derek stopped dribbling the basketball. No, I can never make up for it, but I can spend every day trying to prevent someone else from making my mistakes. That's my purpose now. That's pretty good, I guess, Lucas said, then grinned. Now stop stalling and try to block my shot. On the 10th anniversary of that terrible night, Derek visited the spot where he'd changed everything. Riverside Towers looked different. New paint, renovated entrance. But apartment 7C was still there. He stood on the sidewalk, looking up at that balcony, remembering. Then he pulled out his journal and wrote, 10 years ago tonight, I became a monster. I hurt the person I loved most. I almost ended her life and destroyed my son's future. Today I'm still paying for that. I'll always be paying for it. But I'm also building something from the ruins. A life dedicated to making sure other men never walk the path I walked. Emma is happy. Lucas is thriving. I'm sober, purposeful, grateful for every breath. This is what redemption looks like. Not forgetting, not being forgiven completely, but doing the work every single day to be better than the worst thing you've ever done. That's enough. It has to be. He closed the journal, took one last look at the building, and walked away into the Chicago evening. Behind him, lights flickered on in apartments, families eating dinner, children laughing, couples having ordinary disagreements that would end with apologies instead of ambulances. Somewhere in Lincoln Park, Emma tucked Lucas into bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You are so loved." Somewhere in Pilsen, Derek returned to his small apartment, made tea, and opened his laptop to prepare for tomorrow's counseling session. The story that began with violence had transformed into something else, not a fairy tale reconciliation, but something more honest. Two people who'd survived the unthinkable separately rebuilt their lives with dignity and found a way to let their son know both his broken past and his hopeful future. That night, as snow began to fall softly over Chicago, both Emma and Derek looked out their respective windows and thought the same thing. We survived. We changed. We're finally free. And in that freedom, carried on the cold winter wind, was something neither expected to find again: peace. The end. If this story touched your heart, remember, love should never hurt. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. There is help. There is hope.